Hey, good morning. So we are doing Lamed Aleph in Taanit today, but we are up to the two dots, about halfway down on Lamed Amud Beis. The Gemara tells us as follows: Zok the Gemara. The Gemara in the Mishnah told us about the machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim about turning over the bed on Tisha B'av. Do you have to turn over the bed? The Mishnah says Rabbi Yehuda mechayev b'kfiyas hamida, v'lo yehodu lo Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda required turning over the bed, but the Chachamim were invited to him. Tanya, the Brisa says, Amrullah Rabbi Yehuda, according to you, Rabbi Yehuda, that you require people to turn over the bed, L'dvarecha, Ubroi Sumenika is Matahei what are pregnant women, nursing mothers going to do? They obviously can't sleep on the floor. What do you mean they should be turning over the bed, not using them on Tisha B'av? Amrullah Rabbi Yehuda responded, Afani Le'amarti El B'yochel. I'm only talking about those who are able to. Obviously, old people, which we're not even talking about here, but clearly, people who are old, sick, pregnant, nursing, etc. Of course, we're not talking about them. Says the Gemara Taanit Amiyach have a brisa that's similar to this. The Maida Behuda Chachamim She'eni Yachal. The Behuda is Maida to the Chachamim that you don't have to turn over any beds when the people are not able. Maida Chachamim Behuda Biyachal. And the rabbis, those that disagree, are Maida to Rabbi Yehuda that when you are able to turn over the beds, then you do have to turn over the beds. In which case, my beinayu. So what's the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim? If each one holds that when you're able to, you should, and then when you're not able to, you don't have to. So where's the nafkamina between them? Says the Gemara, the nafkamina is ikabenai shar mitais. The nafkamina is, as Rashi points out, other beds in the house. Look at Rashi, shar mitais sheva bayis she'enai shayche b'hen. You have other beds in the home that you're not sleeping on. Maybe who's the mechayev masis the mikviyas hamita, who requires you to turn over the beds. Mechayev navi biyachol b'shar mitais. If you're able, meaning you're required to sit on the floor, so then turn over all the beds in the home, not just your bed that you sleep on. So the Chacham who said that you have to sleep on you have to sit on the floor, sleep on the floor when you're able to, but they don't say that you have to turn over every bed in the home, just the bed that you normally use. So that would be the machlokes between Yehuda and the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, in the Tanya, we have a brisa that shows that this is the way to understand that the machlokes between Yehuda and Chachamim is by Shar Mitas. The Tanya is learned in the brisa. That when they said to turn over the bed, let me test it, it wasn't just talking about on its own, but but on all the beds in the home, they should turn over. Meaning that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you should be, if you're able to, you should be turning over all the beds in the home. And what exactly is the point of this? I assume the point is that even if that bed is meyuchid for you and the others are not something that you use, turn them all over, just in case, right? That you shouldn't be sitting on a couch anywhere, not just in your specific bed. In any event, the Gemara concludes, Amar Rava, Hilchasa Katana Didan, Allah is like our Tana, and the rabbis didn't acknowledge, they didn't accept it at all. What does that mean? Sounds like if you just read that the way I read it just now, that Rav is saying that Allah is like our Tana. We don't know exactly who our Tana is, and Chacham didn't agree with Rava. But that's not actually the way to read it. You have to read. You have to add in the Gemara, a word to the Gemara. Amar Rava, Hilchasaka Tana Didan. The halacha is like our Tana. Dika Amar. That said, that the rabbis didn't admit, didn't agree with this halacha at all. That is to say, what he's referring to is, if you go back to the Mishnah, that the Mishnah said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that he requires kfiyas hamita, and the rabbi said the Mishnah, the line of the Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda b'chayv b'kfiyas hamita, v'lo ha'od l'chachamim, and the rabbis didn't agree with him. So we're adding it over here the words kol ikar, but it's essentially all Rav is saying is that the halacha is like the rabbis would disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, and that's it. And that is in fact the halacha. You don't have to turn over the bed. Of the shar mitas, you don't have to turn over the bed of the shar mitas in the home. Yeah. So if you look at Taisus over here, Taisus just adds in exactly what I said. But Taisus points at something else, and that additional point is as follows: the Taisus notes, perish. You don't have to turn over the bed. Again, not the as I just pointed out, it's not the bed fundamentally, because the Chacham agree that that you turn over the bed if it's a situation of Yachal, but they don't agree that you have to turn over the beds of the Shar Mitais. And then Tez says, V'ha'idna, but nowadays, the Chayshina L'chshafim, we are concerned about magic. We're concerned about things that could result in a miraculous or non-normative manner from turning over the bed. So we never turn over the bed. In other words, even though the machlokes between Yehuda and the Chachamim is mashma when it comes to somebody who's yachal, at least on his own bed that he would be required to turn it over, we actually don't turn over any beds. Why? Because we are chayshish for kshafim. We're chayshish for the magic or the demons or whatever it may be that are sort of hiding under the bed. And so if we don't turn it over, even by an oven, we don't do that. Again, how did this fit with the Gemara and Pesach Kafir that we mentioned before? Where we talk about these kinds of shadim, and you have to be worried about these things. And the fact that in those days, Taisus is saying in times of the Yisrael, that they are chashin l'kshafim, that they do worry about this, is all very, very fascinating and interesting to me. We don't have more time to explore it, but it is one of those things to put on the side that the Baalei Taisus were willing to say that they were chashish for kshafim in their days. And lest you say that that doesn't exist, I will show you that at least in parts of my family, it still does exist. All right, moving on. So, yeah, if you look, by the way, at the Rabbeinu Chanan says that so he puts that in, the word diktani, like dikamar, that is the only way you can understand what Rav is saying. Yeah. All right, so we're at the two dots. Now, the last part of the Mishnah that told us that there were no 2 days. There were no 2 days that were so happy for the Jewish people, like Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says as follows: Bishlama Yom Kippurim. It makes sense that Yom Kippur was so happy. Why? Because it was a day of forgiveness. Right? The Jewish people got forgiven on Yom Kippur. Right? And Yom Kippur, Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the second Luchais. Yom Sheni Luchais HaAchronis. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the second Luchais. And then we're now going to explore why Tu B'Av is a happy day. But before we go any further, I literally had a conversation with someone this past Shabbos, where in the context of the conversation, this person was telling me that the pshat in the Mishnah is that there were 2 very happy days, Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. Yom Kippur was very happy because the Slicha Mechila, and Tu B'Av was very happy because of the, I think, 5 or 6 reasons we're going to see now in the Gemara. But the girls only went out dancing on Tu B'Av. I said, what? I don't understand. You learned the Gemara. He says, yeah, the Gemara is saying, you know why they were so happy? Because it was Slicha Mechila. It was a Yom Shin Luchas HaAchronis. It was the day they were given the second Luchas. That's why they were so happy. I said, and? So then nothing. That's it. I said, I'm sorry. That's a misreading of the Mishnah. Forget the Gemara. It's a misreading of the Mishnah. They went out dancing on Yom Kippur. I said, you may not be excited about this proposition, what kind of Yom Kippur they had. I get it that you may be uncomfortable, but that is a totally not correct understanding of the Mishnah. What was my proof? Literally a word. It was so obvious to me that I almost for a second was like, that my whole life not understand the Mishnah correctly. Look back at the Mishnah for a second on Chavav and Beis. The Mishnah tells us, there were no 2 Yom Tovim for the Jewish people, like Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. They would go out with these white dresses, sha'ulan, they were bar, and they would go out into the vineyards. They go out and they would dance in the vineyards. They would dance. They would make dances. What is the lashon of the Mishnah? Because they would go out in the white dresses on both of those days, on Yom Kippur and on Tu B'Av, not on one, on both. Shebahen on both days. And it's Pasha that they're going out on 2 days. They go out of dancing. And you want to say how did they go out in Yom Kippur? I think I may have mentioned when we did the Mishnah. I assume that they went out not in the morning. They went out after Kohen Gadol finished the service. And they went out after he finished the service. What happened on Yom Kippur? Every year until the last 40 years, they had a special sign. It's a red string, turned white. It's a huge miracle. It's on the big Nisan. So obviously, it's a day of unbelievable kapara, unbelievable simcha, because they had survived. The Mishnah tells us in Yuma about the Kohen Gadol will make a Mishnah. All the Mepharshim point out, well, the Mishnah was either after Yom Kippur or was obviously without eating. I'm not sure that it had to be with food. It could have been just singing, could have been just dancing with the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. But it was a big simcha because he came out alive. Remember the Gemara and Yuma test, they were dying every year. Maybe he died later, but he didn't die then. So they had a big simcha. So it's very clear to me that all the Gemara is doing here is trying to explain why Yom Kippur was a happy day. So the fact that we say that it was a day of Simcha v'Chapar, Yom Sheni B'Luchas Achronis, that is not just to run through. It's a day of Simcha Mechila b'chush. We know today that after a full day of standing and fasting and davening, you end up feeling, in a sense, a certain spiritual high that you don't feel the whole year. And we tell ourselves, oh, that's because we've been forgiven. But fundamentally, we believe it very deep down because we know that even if we didn't daven well, we didn't have a lot of kavanah and whatever, nevertheless, we go with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who tells us that Yitzum Hashem is mechaper. So we can at least rely on that. Even if we had a huge headache and we didn't have kavanah, we still know that the day, even if we sat in bed all day and didn't get out at all, you didn't even daven at all, you're still going to be forgiven. So it's a day of Slicha Mechila. But I imagine if somebody slept in bed all day because they had huge headaches or whatever, they may feel that it wasn't the best Yom Kippur, and maybe. But nevertheless, imagine if you can. You can't compare that, but imagine if you have a situation where you can literally see the Chut Hashani turning in the white. You're going to be jumping up and down. So we can understand that this was an expression of a spiritual high that they had seen the Slichan Kapar B'chush. So they're going out to celebrate by perpetuating the Jewish people, by finding shidduchim. That's how it seems to be, that it's not even a question about. I think when we did the Mishnah, I was focusing on the mixed dancing Shabbat and Marshal. We discussed that like people wanted to use that as a proof that mixed dancing. So there's no that. I point out that Yaakov Emden says, when the Marshal says, it doesn't say about mixed dancing. It says the girls were dancing. The boys were trying to pick which one they wanted, but the girls were dancing. It wasn't mixed. But now I'm focusing on this other aspect, the Slichum Mechila Shabbai, that they were expressing themselves in a spiritual manner. It wasn't a tawdry affair. Yeah, so that's in relation to Yom Kippur. And now we're going to discuss what about Tu B'Av. Before we go any further, I just want to mention, the whole year we've been focused on is this Rashi, is it not Rashi, Maritzias. So here, there's a Rashi, Shinu B'Luchas Achron. It's not going to go into the math with you, just tell it to you outside. The Rashi says that essentially the Moshe Rabbeinu was up in Shemayim for how many days? How many days and nights was in Shemayim? 120 days. 120 days and nights, right? 40 days and nights was the first time from Sivan, right? Above Zayin Sivan, he goes up and he comes down, Shivasa B'Tammuz, when the Jewish people made an Egel and breaks the Luchas. Then he goes up again, and if you look at Rashi over here in the middle of the Rashi says, Nishtah Hasham Shmainim Yomim, it's in the middle of the Rashi, Arba'im Yom Amar B'Tfilah, 40 days he stood in tefillah. And that the pasuk says, "V'asnabel fnei Hashem v'abar miyam v'abar mlad v'abar miyam am kibbur rishon." And then 40 days he was again not doing the tefillah, but learning or wherever learning the Torah from the Rebbeinu Shalom. So he was there for 80 days. If you count from about Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Yud Ches Tammuz, etc., you count the 80 days, you'll get the end of Tammuz, which is like 12 odd days. Then you have 29 days in El and the 10 days of Tishrei, right? So you have essentially you get back to the 80 days, and that comes out to the 10 days that it comes out to Yom Kippur, the 10th day of Tishrei, when Moshe Rabbeinu comes back down, and then he gives back the Luchos the second Luchos. I just point out that it's not a machlokes here. We can't prove it from Rashi. This morning I double checked again Rashi and Akev where this is can't get into more now, but if you look in Parashat Akev, you will see that the pasuk there says "Vaspal Hashem, Vasnapol Fnei Hashem, Abarim Grim, Abarim." It says it 3 times. If you look there, you'll see the Farshim saying, "Well, isn't he referring to the same time twice?" Fine, maybe so. But if you look at Rashi over here, it sounds like he went up 40 days, 40 nights, comes down Shavas B'Tammuz, then he goes up 80 days and comes down Yom Kippur. That's how Rashi is mashma. If you look in Bava Basra, but it's not Rashi in Bava Basra, we all know it's the Rashbam. But if you look there in Bava Basra, over there the Rashbam says, and maybe you have it on the side of the Gemara, you will notice that over there it's very clear that Moshe Rabbeinu went up for 40 days, 40 nights, comes down Shavas B'Tammuz, goes up, stays up for 40 days, 40 nights, down for the Egel, comes down on Chav Ches B'Av, and then he goes back up on Chav Ches B'Av, and that's the 3rd time. So he went up and down, up and down, up and down. Whereas from Rashi, it's mashma, he went up and down once, and then he went up and stayed up till he came down in Yom Kippur. So the question would be if at the end of Av, in Chav Ches Av, if Moshe Rabbeinu in fact came down again or not. That would seem to me, at least the machlokes between Rashi and the Rashbam. From Rashi and Chumash, I'm not 100% clear. I double checked again today to see if I had in my notes that I had made a clear answer as to what Rashi holds, and I couldn't find it. I know I once tried to prove that Rashi was different than Rashi here in Taanit, and he did in fact agree with the Rashbam that he goes up and down 3 times, but I didn't know where it was, so I have to check my notes. Maybe I'll find something that gave me that remembering. In any event, we know for sure that Rashi is disagreeing with the Rashbam in terms of the staying up for 80 days or coming down in the middle of the 80 days for a day. Okay, so that is the big excitement for Yom Kippur. We understand that. Now, what about Tu B'Av? El Tu B'Av Mahi. What's the reason for Tu B'Av being such a happy day? It was a day that the tribes were permitted to intermarry one with the other. My darush. What were they darshaning that enabled them to feel permitted to intermarry? Let's first explain what was the problem. The problem was as follows. If you remember the end of Parshas Pinchas, the end of Bamidbar, so we talked in Pinchas, and then in Parshas Masei, we discussed what happens with the Bnei Salafchad. The Bnei Salafchad said, Avinu meis Bamidbar, v'hu lo haya b'seicha edo anu adim al Hashem, right? V'ki b'chetay meis, uvanim lo hayu lo. Lo mani gara. They wanted to know, why should we be missing out on the Nachala? Our father, Tzlafchad, he died for whatever the sins he died. Mashma is from their taina is that he died for his own sin. In other words, he didn't die from he didn't die from some sort of rebellion against God with the others. So he shouldn't be punished by not having an achala. And Moshe Rabbeinu sort of punished for what happened in Parashas Ba'al Yisrael, where he told the people who were asking about being tamei to wait while he talks to God in a sort of manner that he was 100% with expectation he would be able to talk to God. So there he has to go ask Hashem, and Hashem says, yeah. They're going to in fact be able to be yarshening with among the Jewish people. They're not losing Slavchad's nachala. His nachala will go to his daughters. So he looked then in Parshas Masei. So the people of the tribe of Menashe, they were, whoa. If we allow them to get an nachala, let's say we got 100 acres, So, and he got one of them. So then his daughters are going to go out and get married, and the sons of those women are going to be from their husbands' shevet, and they're going to be Yerush, that land that was originally from Menashe. We're going to lose it. The tribe of Menashe is going to lose it. So Hashem gives a command. Yeah, the people of daughters of Tzalafchad can in fact be Yerush, the inheritance of Tzalafchad, but they can only marry within their family. The Pasuk says, "L'vnei dodeihem l'nashim." Like by Esther, they married their cousins. They married the sons of their uncles. They married their cousins. Yeah, it's not an example of kissing cousins, or maybe it is, but this is what it was. They married their cousins. In the Haimish world, they used to marry first cousins, like, saying it wasn't such a, today I think maybe a little less, but my wife's family, that's what happened. In my family, that's what happened. That's, you go to the trees, you see, you're like, wow, okay. There's a lot of that. So people are related like 3 times over. If you had, it's like really a vamos to figure out how many different ways you're related. Yeah. But what does it mean when we say Yom Shehutu Shvatim Lavi Zeh B'Zeh? Imagine you're now from the tribe of Menashe. So B'nai Salafchad got the inheritance. They now have to marry in the tribe. So this wasn't just a rollout, a promulgation of a law for B'nai Salafchad. This was for all Jewish people. Any situation where there was a person who was going to be Yerush in Eretz Yisrael, and he didn't have male descendants, but he had female descendants, the female descendants had to only marry within the tribe, because of the fear that if they married outside the tribe, any children would now be yuchas to another shape, and they would take away the land. So as a result of that, they would not allow any person from one tribe to marry, any woman from one tribe to marry into another tribe, out of the fear that they will be a Yerush. They will be the one who ends up being Yerush. Now, maybe if the person had 20 children and a lot of them were boys and there was a girl, maybe they wouldn't. But you can imagine if there was like no boys or one boy and you had a bunch of, you can imagine the situation where they were like, you know what? Let's not take any risks. You can't marry anybody outside of the family. So because of that, they essentially prevented the nachla from moving around. So that gezerah that resulted from what the Torah says, that the Bnei Slav have to marry their own family, that caused the Jewish people not to intermarry among Shvatim, and that stops at the end of the Yerusha V'Nacha. At the end of that time when they divide up the land, they then permit the intermarriage. As the Rashbam explains Baba Basra, they permitted then the Nachla to go from Shevet to Shevet. In other words, yeah, it's true that this portion from Menashe might now be in Yehuda. No, that's what it's going to be. But the Isser Shabai, the darshan is just applicable to that early generation that was going to be the one dividing up the land. So that the Gemara, my darush, how would they darshan this? This was what Hashem commanded to the daughters of Salavchad. It's only going to be noyeg in that generation that's coming into the land of Israel. But after that, it was permitted, so it became a yantif, because now all the tribes were able to be lavai zeh b'zeh. Just as an aside, you should understand that this Gemara is alluding to what is a fundamental issue during the first bias. It is a fundamental issue, even if it became mutter. Just because it became mutter didn't really change fundamentally, right? If you look through Shoftim, we're about to get to a story now where the Pelegish Begiva, where there was a civil war, where all the tribes of Israel ganged up on Binyamin because of what Binyamin had allowed within its territory. There was the terrible situation of Pelegish Begiva that they wouldn't have gone out and destroyed Binyamin. The issue was the cover-up or the lack of care, meaning after the Pelegish Begiva is literally cut up and quartered and sent out pieces of her body throughout Eretz Yisrael, saying, "This is what happened in Giva. This is what happened with the tribe of Binyamin." So all the tribes get together, want to destroy what's going on. They say to Binyamin, "Give us the people from Giva. Give up the people who are the perpetuators of the crime," and they wouldn't. And they said no. They said, "If you say no, we're going to come and attack you." And they said, "Yeah, no problem." And they end up wiping out, decimating almost nearly the entire tribe of Binyamin. That's why Shaul, who's he's so tall and so handsome, he's able to say when Shmuel says he's going to be anointed as king. So Shaul responds to Shmuel and says, "Me? But I'm from the Mikatane Shvatim. I'm from the tiniest of the tribe. What do you mean, tiniest of the tribes? You're from Binyamin. What do you mean, tiniest of the tribes? Because Binyamin had become tiny as a result of this war. And if you look what happens, right, when Shlomo dies, and Chav wants to listen to his advisors who say to raise the taxes, and not the Shlomo's advisors who say, chill out here a little bit. So he ends up causing a civil war. The tribe split. Because even till that day, they were still viewed tribally. They still viewed themselves. You're from Menashe, you're from Yehuda, you're from Yemen. This was a problem fundamentally throughout. It wasn't a simple thing to turn from being Shvatim to Am Yisrael, to start feeling as just one nation and not thinking in a fundamental way about the nature of being from separate from separate tribes. Okay. So Zot the Gemara. So on that day, they darshened up that the whole issue of intermarrying, that was only in the tribe that was coming into the land. But after that, they were allowed the nachla to move around. So and as a result of that, they made it a yontif. Why particularly that day? Like, how is that a connection to Tu B'Av? I don't know. I'm not sure how you get to that being that day specifically. Yeah. Zot the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Nachman. As by the way, I should just point out that it was the Rashbam who says that none of these Amorim are really arguing with each other. These are all just different traditions that they all had from their Rabbi. Yeah. So Rav Yosef, Rav Nachman. So Rav Yosef says in the name of Rav Nachman, what's the reason that Tu B'Av was such a happy day? Yom Shir Toshev Binyamin Love B'Kol. Right, we just alluded to Legish Begiva before. It was the day that Binyamin was permitted to enter back into the Jewish people and start marrying among the Jewish people. Because if you remember what I just said, is that they destroyed Binyamin, mamash, unbelievable destruction. By the way, that's the reason why that story ends Shaftim, right? It's to show you, because the pasuk says that Ein Melech Yisrael, Ish Kol Yasher Ben Yasa. That's the reason to show you why you need a king. You need a king because the people cannot get along at all. Without a king, this is what you have. We don't actually know that Pelegish Begiva took place at the end of Shaftim. It's put there at the end of Shaftim to be a segue into the book of Shmuel, which is going to show you the whole Shaul and David and the leadership now of kings. We're switching from Shaftim to Malachim. It's put there in the end of Shaftim to segue and to show you why you need a king, because it was such an anarchy. So if you look there, you see the Jewish people attacked Binyamin a couple times and did not win. And the last time is when they win, and they really destroyed Binyamin badly. And Binyamin as a tribe is finished, and no one's willing to intermarry with them. They managed to find a couple of people who refused the call, who were living in Evar Yard and Yavish Gilad. They kill out those men, and those women, they tell the people from Binyamin, go grab them. And that's what they did. That's how Binyamin got married wives, because they weren't allowed. They had taken an oath, then they're not going to be allowed to marry with Binyamin. They're going to destroy the tribe. Mamish, that's that. On the one hand, you appreciate the fact that the sensitivity to try to, have a sort of a serious punishment for what happened in Pelegish Begiva. Yes, but that kind of level of destruction was too much. They killed men, women, everybody. They killed everybody. There's a few people left from Yemen who survived. A few men. They had no wives. They had nobody to marry. So they said, go grab these women who now they killed their husbands from Yavish Gilad, who had refused to heed the call to go fight in the Pelegish Begiva battle. And boom, that's how now they had women for them to be married to. So the Gemara says, so what happened? On that day of Tu B'Av, now they let Sheva Binyamin come in and intermarry again with the regular Jewish people. They can marry anybody. How did it happen? Everybody had taken an oath that said, we're not going to let our daughters marry into Binyamin. Leisha. So what was the drasha? My darash. How did they darshan it? Amarav mimenu v'leimenu. Because the pasuk said ish mimenu leitain b'nai livnamin leisha. We're not going to let anybody from us, take our daughters to Binyamin for a wife, but not from our children. Our children, if they want to give their daughters to Binyamin, that's okay. So therefore, that's how they made the drasha to allow again the Jewish people to intermarry with Binyamin. There was a day that the Mesa Midbar stopped dying. Here Rashi gives a shot. The first part of Taisus gives the same shot, then Taisus gives the second shot. Is when did the people die during the 38 years, after the sin of the Meraglim? So the simple understanding, and probably the way most of us always understood, was they would they would dig themselves a grave on every Tisha B'Av, right? And as Rashi says, in every Tisha B'av, that people die, whoever lived got up. And on the last Tisha B'av, they all went into the graves that they dug, and everybody got up. They realized, oh, it's over. The Gezer is over. Now they're coming into the land of Israel. It says in the bottom of Taisus, the Yesh Mefarshim Mason Mechol Yom. That no, it wasn't that they only died on Tisha B'av. They died really the whole time during the year. But by Tisha B'av, they had Roiv HaMesim. Ach Roiv HaMesim Ha'Olam by Tisha B'av. Most of the people died by Tisha B'av, and that's how you got to the situation where on Tisha B'av was a recognizable difference that no one died, and that's what they said. Oh, this is the end of the Gezerah, and that's how they know. So what do you mean? Well, again, this one at least it's clear. Why Tu B'Av? So Rashi explains. Right, the other ones we're not sure what has to do with Tu B'Av, why Tu B'Av specifically, but this one we understand. Why? Because on 9 Av, when they all went down into the grave to go to sleep for the last time, so they all got up and they said, "Well, one second, maybe it wasn't Tisha B'Av." So they went back down again on 10, and by Tu B'Av they recognized the moon was full, and they're like, "Oh, the moon is full." Now it is for sure that the Gezerah is over, and that's why on Tu B'Av was very clear that the Gezerah was done for, and they were now permitted to go into Eretz Yisrael, everybody who had survived, and the Gezerah was over. Okay, continues the Gemara. Until the death of all the people from the Meraglim finished, till they all had died, Moshe Rabbeinu hadn't had a chance to speak to the Rebbeinu Shalom, right? We know we jump from Parashat Shlach, Karach, we have no idea where it took place, Karach, the Machlokes Rishonim, but we know we jump from Shlach, which takes place in the second year, to Parashat Chukas, which takes place in the 40th year. We're jumping 38 years. What happened? So the Gemara says over here, right? We used to try to get every week something from the parsha. Here we have, or every day. Here we have something from the parsha, Mamish. Right? This week's parsha, the pasuk says, after the people from the age of the warrior years died, and Hashem spoke to me saying, so that is to say, until they died, Hashem didn't speak to Moshe. Rashi points out here that can't be the case because of the fact that the end of the 40th year, right? You don't start out on Av, you start out on Nisan, and you find out that Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock. Hashem spoke to him then, right? That's before Tisha B'Av. Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. He told him, go hit the rock, or go speak to the rock. What do you mean Hashem didn't speak to him? So Rashi says that whatever speaking Hashem did, and I think Rashi might be trying to say that he did speak to him through the 38 years. But I'm saying at least in the 40th year, we know there were certain things that happened before the Tisha B'Av, right? Because Aaron dies in the 5th month, right? So we know things happen before Tisha B'Av. So what's the proof? Says Rashi, that he didn't speak to him b'yichud or b'chiba. He didn't speak to him with a certain love, there was a certain level of closeness that wasn't there. Pel pet. Rashi says that over here, maybe this was Bechezi and Laila. This was just dreams. It wasn't the same level. I remember that the level of Aaron and Miriam was the level of Bechezi and Laila, and Moshe had Pel Peh. It says whatever it was, but I think Rashi's trying to say that he did speak to him through the 38 years. And I'm saying to you, at least Musad Pshat, he for sure spoke to Moshe before Tu B'Av, before 9 Av. Before that, for sure he spoke to him. And we have proof. We have proof of that at least from Av. We don't have proof of that maybe from the 38 years, but we have proof of that from the beginning of the 40th year until Av. That we for sure have proof for. All right, so now we have to finish up here. Yeah. So the Gemara says, all right, so we're up to Ula. Yeah, so Vayikash Tambo call Anshim Bechon Labus Vaydabashama Elai Hadibor. Right, Elai Hadibor. That's what Hashem spoke to me. Another reason. Ula Amar Yom Shabitul Hashem Ben Ela Parts Doyes. Right, you remember Yerav Menavat, we literally just had it back in Chav Ches. Yerav Menavat set up various things to prevent people from going to El Reg, because that would prevent people from being loyal to his kingdom. They would be going back to Rechavam. So people had to pretend that when they were going for Bikurim, they had to pretend when they bring the Atzim Aracha. This is what we just learned. So they removed it. Hashem ben Ela was a bad king. Nevertheless, he was good enough to remove those officers on the road, and he was not worried about them going to the Beis Hamikdash. The Amar on top of the page of Lamed Aleph, whoever wants to go can go an Eila Regel, can go to the Beis Hamikdash. He didn't stop them. Again, he was a bad king, but he wasn't as bad as the other Malchi Yisrael that came before him. So that would happen also on Tu B'Av. Again, what's the proof that happened on Tu B'Av? I don't know, but that is another reason. We all know the story about Harugi Beitar coming out at the time of Tisha B'Av. Harugi Beitar is the end of Bar Kokhba, the last stanchion, the last place where they were holding out, and they were killed. And we know that they were able to survive without being masriach. Survive is the wrong word. They were able to remain without being masriach. Right, their bodies didn't decompose. So since they didn't decompose, and it was for 7 years without burial, they weren't getting in Zion, all the blood, they didn't need fertilizer, crazy amount of murder they did there in Beitar. So they were able to finally be buried. That's how it comes out the bracha that they were not decomposed, and Hametiv that they were able to finally be buried. That happened on Tu B'Av. Again, not clear exactly why that would be on Tu B'Av. Chase points out the top. From here we get to say Hatev Hametiv on good wine. Yeah, Rabbi Yosef Amri Tarvayu. That's for the day when they stopped cutting the wood for the Marach. Remember, they still brought wood, right? Because we still had them bringing wood by Chaf Elul, by Aleph Tavis. They brought wood even after this, but it would stop cutting wood at this time. Why is that? Because of the fact that it wouldn't be too wet. It wouldn't be dried in the right way. The sun gets weaker. They would no longer cut wood for the Maracha because they wouldn't get dry enough. It was called the day when they used to break the axe, that they would cut the wood. Whoever's going to be, because the days are getting shorter, they have more time to learn. So everyone who's meistif in the learning is Yosef, they're going to have a lot more chayim. And somebody who doesn't have the ability to add more time to their learning for not good reasons, so Yosef, they're going to die early. Says the Gemara, Maya Yosef, Rav Yosef Takbri Imeh. His mother's going to bury, meaning he's going to die Shaloi Bismana because he hasn't added more learning to his days. That's Rashi, as the Ram says in the Torah, right? That's why the nights were given in order to be able to learn more. Yeah, Taisus here is bothered. What do you mean that what does the word Yosef mean? The Gemara wasn't sure. How can it be? Fine. Says the Gemara. Let's just do one more line. The two dots. The Jewish girls will go out dancing. Tana Rabbana Bas Melach She'elas Bas Keren Gadol Bas Keren Gadol Bas Sagan Bas Mishach Muchama Bas Mishach Muchama Ben Bas Keren Hedge V'Chlei Shal Shulin Zem Mizek Kadesh Shleish Bas Es Misha Ein Like. Right, the most oppressive girls would borrow from the ones right beneath them, but all of the Jewish people would borrow from one another. And the reason they would borrow from one another was because of the fact that no one should be walking around in the fancy dress and say, "Oh, you know what? We want that one." No, they should all be, even the poor ones could be wearing the designer, and the rich ones could be wearing the poor dresses, and everybody was to be looked at for the internal and not for the externalities. That was the fundamental idea of this last lines. You had to put everything into the mikvah. So even if they were folded up and kept in a box, meaning there was no shash of nida, nevertheless it still had to be toiveled. All right, we'll stop over here.